Welcome to yet another episode of Blocks and Barriers with me, your host, Tracy, the health coach. Today, we have a special guest. We have Monique Marks with us today, a certified health coach and registered social worker. With a unique blend of skills and experience, Monique is an accomplished public speaker and advocate and has received multiple awards for project implementation, research achievements, and teaching. Monique is dedicated to improving quality of life and health outcomes, and she specializes in managing chronic illness, resolving substance use disorders, supporting end-of-life stages, and promoting mental health wellness. Her core values emphasize finding joy, connection, staying curious, and living in your purpose. So it's such a pleasure. Monique, welcome.
Thank you so much, Tracy.
So just a little bit about yourself in terms of where you grew up and how you ended up in the space of helping others with substance use.
Okay, so sure, where to begin? Okay, I grew up in Johannesburg, in South Africa, and I suppose I had a fairly normal growing up life. But I think the one thing that obviously made growing up in South Africa at the time when I grew up in South Africa was that we had this horrendous thing called apartheid, which was very much part of my consciousness as a young person. I then went to university in Johannesburg at the University of the Witwatersrand. Was very defiant, came from an Orthodox Jewish family who wanted me to study medicine. And so what I did was I looked for the points that this course that needed the lowest points at university. And it was social work. And I had no idea what social work was, but I did it as a major act of defiance. And in retrospect, it was the best thing I could have done because, what social work did is it provided me not only with a platform to reach out to marginalized communities in a very real way, but also a set of skills which allow me to engage with very difficult and deep mental health issues, which I think, a lot of other courses don't provide with. So that was my beginning of my sort of career development, and then it went a little bit all over the place. And I landed up doing a master's and a doctorate in sociology and teaching at universities for many years. And then a couple of years ago, my youngest son actually said to me, "Mom, you need to become somebody who does something in health," which was like, why are you saying that? Now, this is an interesting story, Tracy, because in my 20s and living quite a very hectic life, what happened to me was what Gabor Mate says when the body says no. And my body said no. And I didn't actually understand what was going on at the time, but I landed up in hospital for about 6 weeks and was eventually diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. I was at that point lost my mobility and my vision. And at 24, that was quite a radical thing. Anyway, that was a story. The disability lasted for some time, and it took about 5 years to literally pull my way out of it. And if you were to see me now, it would be totally invisible. I'm very active. I have 3 children. I am very, very fit and healthy. And in many ways, I think MS allowed me to be more conscious of my well-being. And so when my son was talking to me about this, it was really saying, Mom, you need to share your stories, and you need to use the story in reaching out to other people that are struggling with these difficult diagnoses. And initially I thought he was insane. And then I thought, no, he's not insane. And then I did the course with the Health Coaches Academy, which is based in the UK. And I'm really, really glad that I did. So now I'm able to combine the two. And I have now gone full time into health coaching and into, well, combining of health coaching and social work. So that's a little bit of my background in terms of the
Yes.
more formal stuff,
Yeah.
with a little bit
Yeah.
of illness in between, which is
Yes.
managed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, no.
Please.
So I suppose my own sort of experience of managing what is seen to be a degenerative chronic illness, which has not degenerated, has given me, I suppose, the internal resources and understanding that we can actually change the course of events. But at the same time, we do need to take heed of when our bodies say no and what our bodies are trying to tell us.
Yeah. Amazing. And for someone who may not know what health coaching is, before I go on to the next question, what is health coaching?
So, health coaching is a sort of a strand of coaching, if you want to call it that. And what coaches in general do is they work or they accompany a person or a group of people to get to a sort of a goal or intention which they have defined. In other words, it's not something that somebody else imposes on you. And then they work together with you to reach that particular goal. And that is done through encouragement, through support, through providing information if and when it's needed, but also through challenging the person when challenges are required, right? So it's not just the soft stuff, it's also the challenges. And most importantly, creating systems of accountability so that the person is aware that if they actually commit to something, there's somebody over there watching that happens. And if it doesn't happen, trying to make sense of why it doesn't happen. Now, health coaching is doing exactly that, but in the space of wellness, in saying, what are our goals that we want to reach to get to our greatest wellness? And that differs depending on where you come from, depending on what your sort of biopsychosocial space looks like, depending on who the people are that we engage with, depending on our age group, depending on our gender. There are a range of factors that impact what wellness means to each of us. And so, as a health coach, what we really need to do is to understand what is your wellness and where do you want to go to. So, what's well for me may not be what's well for you. You may think wellness is about being able to run 25-kilometer marathon. My idea of wellness is being able to go to a Pilates class and being very strong in it 5 times a week, right? So, and that's because we come with different skills, capacities, dreams, histories, all of which are taken into account by health coaches.
Yeah, amazing. And so how do you get to combine health coaching and social work?
I think it's important to remember for all of us that when we are facing some form of dis-ease, in other words, not feeling comfortable in our bodies, for whatever reason it may be, there is usually a psychosocial issue that underpins that. So, just by example, yesterday I had somebody come to me for the first time, and I had met her at a medical thing, and she had gone to a nutritionist who she felt had given her very bad advice. And she wanted to come to me with, she is overweight, but what she's worried about is developing diabetes down the line because it's in her family. And she came smiling and happy. And I was like, this is great. This is going to be a fun session where we're going to talk about how we deal with this. But within about 3 minutes, the tears were just flowing. And when I said to her, like, what is behind the tears? She said, how did I get myself into this state?
Hmm.
Why did I not take care of myself? Why did I not put myself first? And she's about to be 60 at the end of this year. And she wants to find that she has control over her body before she hits 60. That's her goal. But I suppose what I'm trying to say to you is that our health issues have always got a psychosocial dimension to them. So either, we land up ill because we have a psychosocial issue in the first place, or we develop a psychosocial issue because we are not well. And so they're very interconnected. And so when I work with people, I recognize that, there are going to be difficult emotions that come up, and it's important to work through those emotions and to be able to hold them. And in that respect, I think I'm really fortunate to have had that training to be able to say to somebody, I'll walk you through this, both in terms of your emotional well being, but also the physical well being. So for me, I think, to be quite frank, I think that most of the health coaching courses do not train enough in mental health, because I don't think that they're very separate from one another. So I just think, like, look out when you're looking for a health coach for somebody that is able to do that, or somebody who's able to say, I want to continue working with you, but I see there's a lot of mental health issues, and I will refer you if need be, so that we work as a team, myself and your social worker or psychologist or psychiatrist. And as health coaches, we are taught to remain in scope, right? So, in other words, not to try to do things that we're not trained for. It is a fact, Tracy, and I'm sure it's true of you as well, that most health coaches come into health coaches already trained in some other profession. And so
Correct.
we all are multi-skilled people as we enter into health coaching. And that's important for listeners to understand, but it's also important for us to own the previous training that we came with, and to say, how do we blend this to be a one person, not multiple people?
Yeah. And I love that you said the word blend, in that, even for yourself, your social work, your health coaching, it sounds like it needs you to have certain skills because you're handling difficult emotions. So what personal qualities or skills maybe do you feel someone in the space of, say, social work or health coaching, or even in substance misuse, like you've had vast experience in, what kind
Yeah.
of qualities or skills does such a person need?
So I'll talk first about the qualities. And I think when I talk about the qualities, I'm really talking about the value system, because values really underpin who we are as human beings. And I think when you enter into the space, particularly, let's use the example of substance use. Strangely, I just had somebody on the phone now who hasn't acknowledged his opiate use disorder to me, but it's come to me in a very strange and interesting way, which we can discuss at some other point. And I've said to him, we're going to deal with something that you haven't raised with me, but I am going to raise it with you, because otherwise we're dancing around the issue. But know that I'm coming to you from a space of non-judgment. I'm coming to you from a space of wanting to understand what were the drivers that got you into the space that you're in right now. And my intention is to see you gravitate towards your wellness back again, right? To get back you, who you are. So I'd say that, the space of non-judgment is the first one. The other one, when you're dealing with people who have got themselves into difficult situations, regardless of what they are, is to recognize, that we are fundamentally all human beings that are fragile, that are frail, and that are contradictory. And that is actually what makes us all one human entity, right? That we all have these qualities, right? Nobody is comprehensive all the time. Nobody is without contradictions. Nobody comes in without frailty. And I think if we recognize that in ourselves, we're able to recognize it in each other and be able to work with it in a way that is not saying, oh my goodness, this person is in a worse state than that person. We're all struggling with our own realities. Many people have asked me, I work in a medical center. And so there are a lot of people who say to me, like, we'd much rather be dealing with the physical stuff than the mental health stuff. That's your kind of world. You deal with that, right? Because that's the difficult stuff. And I have to say they're right. Like, if I think about what happens in a session with me as opposed to what happens in a session with the doctor next to me. Well, firstly, that's usually a 15 to 20-minute consult, and there's a toolbox, right? And the toolbox is medication. When you come into our spaces as health coaches, usually for an hour, the toolbox is you as a person and the grounding that you're able to give, right? And I guess for that, you need to be able to say, as much as I'm able to understand where you're coming from, I am not becoming you. In other words, I do not take on your pain. And it's something very, very important because often when clients come with a lot of pain into the room, they get worried that they are going to impact on you. And I think it's very important to say, I want you to know whatever you are bringing here, I am okay. I am actually going to be okay. I have my mechanisms for keeping myself well. So do not feel responsible for my emotions, but you have to be absolutely sincere about it. So part of it is, how do I keep myself in a good mental health state? Because I have to. A big part of it is I make it very clear. You're very fortunate to have me at this time, Tracy, because usually I say to people between 5 and 7, I'm not available.
Yeah.
I'm not available because that is the time when I go to the gym and I generally either do Pilates, water aerobics, or yoga. That is my sanity, right? My sanity is knowing that my body is healthy and that that's connected to my mind, and then that's connected to the other people that I engage with. So this is something really, really important to me. And then I think also just constantly keeping your brain active and curious. You spoke about curiosity as being one of my values, always recognizing that I have more to learn, right? And so I'm a big reader. Every night I go to bed, I read. It keeps my mind active. I have been, in the role of a research professor for many, many years. And so reading is just part of what I do. And the nice thing, I guess, about being a reader is that you're able to be in touch with what is the new evidence that is coming up around an illness or around the way that we eat or whatever the case may be, right? So it's maintaining that curiosity. So all of those things combined, Tracy, but mostly recognizing that we can empathize with people, but we are not them. They maintain their own integrity. And we know for ourselves, if you want to speak to somebody and you've got something very emotive and they collapse, then you feel like, oh my goodness, I don't want you to feel bad about this. I'll rather go talk to that other person. So I think that is a very important thing to get across to people when they're coming in with difficult emotions. And
Yeah.
it even goes to the point, people will say, what do you do when somebody begins to cry, for example, because that does happen in health coaching settings. And there are two ways of dealing with it. The one is to say, what is that person's personal space? How comfortable are they with you coming closer to them? If they are comfortable with it and it seems that that will be comforting, all you need to do is a very simple touch, because touch is a very healing thing. We all know how when we feel touched by somebody, we feel like we cared for, right? That's the one way. And the other way is to just simply sit with that person and to allow them to enter into whatever grief it is that they are feeling, and just to be present and not to do anything, right? And through the gift of silence, which is not an easy thing to provide, emotions then begin to get resolved. So those are just a couple of, I suppose, skills or tips around dealing with difficult emotions.
Yeah. And I love that you said it's not the client or the individual's responsibility to worry on how we will take them, because sometimes that's a big issue in them seeking help. You'll hear people say, oh, I don't want to be a bother. You're not a bother. We're
Yeah, yeah,
capable of taking care of our own emotions. So you just come and seek the help. So when it comes to your experience with substance use disorders, what do you
yeah.
think is the main driver?
Okay. So I'm very much, I've mentioned his name before, and I will mention him before because I think he is, at the moment, probably one of the most influential people in medicine, and that is Gabor Mate.
Mhm.
And Gabor Mate, who really does promote the biopsychosocial model of understanding health and wellness, and says that the role of medicine, and we are probably included in that, is not to treat, but to heal. And what are we healing in relation to substance use? What we're generally healing is some kind of trauma that has happened in somebody's life. 90% of the time, underlying problematic drug use is trauma. And it's because of that, when I speak about drug use in public forums, which I do often, I say to people, drugs are not the problem, they are the solution. Therefore, we need to find what the solution is. I mean, what the problem is. And the problem is usually either trauma or some form of disconnect from somebody that was significant in your life or was never in your life and should have been in your life. And once you begin to unpack the trauma and the disconnect, it really, really does create the ability to start scaffolding your life in a way that you really would like to have it. So I don't, in working with people that are substance users, and this may be something that you want to ask more about, my expectation is not for people to be abstinent. That is a choice. My goal in working with people is for them to say, this is my idea of what it means to reach life normalization. It could be anything. It could be looking after your children. It could be connecting with a parent. It could be having a job. It could be taking care of your personal hygiene. And in the South African context, it could be adhering to your treatment, for example, on ARVs, right? Which you've just let slide while you rough living. And so once a person has decided what their own goal is, not what my goal, because often we come in with substance users and we say, okay, you need to become abstinent, you need to be clean, right? And when we do that, we are already stigmatizing, we are already judging, we're already saying there's a difference between being clean and being unclean. These are all words that I don't use and that I don't believe in. So, so that is my sort of approach to dealing with substance use, recognizing that the drivers are not people who want to, create chaos. They are not people that are irresponsible. They are people who have had massive trauma and it has not been resolved. And I think it's a really important point for us to just bear in mind. There is a wonderful sociologist who we see in the press often. She lives in India, very bravely continues to live in India. And her name is Arundhati Roy. Most people will know about Arundhati Roy, the author of The God of Small Things. And Arundhati Roy makes a very profound statement. And she says, we are all just accidents of birth. We do not choose where we are born into. We do not choose which families we're born onto. We do not choose whether born street living or born into a very wealthy environment. And once we understand that we are all accidents of birth, it gives us that humility to say, I am no better or worse than you are. We just happen to be born into different spaces and we are navigating different difficulties. And so it's with that I begin working with substance users rather than with this idea that substance users are irresponsible, bad people, because that is not the case. And so what happens with substance users when people do see them in that way, they begin to self-stigmatize as well. I'm an addict. When people say I'm an addict, I just want to pull my hair out. You're not an addict. You're a person. You're a human being who's navigating a difficult space. Let's stop the labels and let's get into you. Let's find out what your life trajectory is. And let's find out where you want to go with what you're bringing into the room. I hope that helps.
It does, because then it's showing as you said, sometimes we think the issue is drugs, but as you said, it could be trauma. It could be that disconnection that you have from either someone you've missed out on having or someone who should have been there. So there's a bigger issue that we don't see or we don't realize. And then from that's how the stigma comes. So it sounds like when it comes to substance use disorders, it's a bigger issue. Maybe it's a health issue, maybe it's a psychological issue. Do you feel the systems are we looking at it that way? And how should we look at it?
So look, the predominant and dominant model of dealing with substance use is they're two. right? The one is the criminal justice one, which is that, if you're a drug user, the best thing to do is to put you in prison and to charge you, and that way you will resolve your drug use disorder. Totally not the case. Totally the opposite, right? So what happens when people go into prison for a drug offense? There are two outcomes. The one is that they have a criminal record, which means that they can never ever get into the job market again. Very, very difficult. And the other is that because the drug use issue has not been resolved, what happens very, very often is that people who go into prison don't have access to whichever their drug of choice is. They leave prison and they go straight back to the dealer that they were initially working with. And they take the same amounts that they were taking before they went into prison. And their body's tolerance for that drug no longer exists. And that's when a lot of overdoses happen. And that is because we refuse to acknowledge that this is not something that's going to go away if we don't deal with what the roots of it is. So that's the one way, the criminalization of drugs is something you spoke about me as an advocate. That is one of the things that I would advocate because, putting people in prison for drug use is a human rights violation and it doesn't help. Okay, the other model is the medical model, which says, basically you have a brain disorder and we need to deal with you medically, right? And we'll just pump you with a whole lot of medication, and that's the end of the story, right? Now, there's value in the medical model because the medical model takes us away from the criminalization like approach. But what the medical model does is that it keeps on saying there's something wrong with you. You're a sick person. You're not a well person, right? And I prefer to say medicine has a role to play in substance use disorders. And in fact, there are many medical substitutes, medicine substitutes for particular drugs, particularly opiates. But it's more than that. It's not just a medical thing. It's a social issue. We need to look at why is it that the majority of people that are in active drug use come from particular social groupings. What is going on in that space? And then it means that it's not just about the individual. It's a system that has failed us rather than us that have failed the system.
And so how does health coaching come into the picture to try and help people with substance issues?
Well, the first one, because it's actually, I belong to what's called the harm reduction movement, which is a movement that understands drug use in the way that I've described it as something which is underlined usually by trauma, and that we need to understand the drugs of drug use, and that people who use drugs have a right to determine what they put into their body and what they don't put into their body, but they also have the right to the best possible evidence-based services in dealing with their substance use disorder. So when people come into my room as a health coach, I would say to anybody coming into my room, what is it that your idea of optimal wellness is? Where do you want to get to? And when you do that with a substance user, it's the first time anybody has ever asked them, what is your goal for your life, right? And once people feel like I'm able to work towards where I want to be with my life, whether I'm using drugs or I'm not using drugs, it creates the sense I'm a human being again. I have the right to have dreams. I have the right to want my life to be in a certain place. And I am deeply grateful to have somebody working alongside me, accompanying me on my journey. So my role is really one of accompaniment. It's saying, I'm here to journey with you to try and attain whatever it is that your self-determined goal is, as we would as health coaches with anyone else. So there's a very strong alignment, actually, Tracy, between health coaching and working in the harm reduction frame. They're both about accompaniment. They're both about recognizing that we all operate at different paces and in different spaces. They both recognize that health is a very broad term and can mean many, many things, right? And so that's where I enter into. Having said that, I do work very closely with medical professionals because I'm not a medical doctor. So if I'm working, for example, with people that are opioid users, and that's the predominant sort of drug of choice in Durban where I live, I will call on medical doctors to come in and say, this person needs an opiate substitute. That is what is going to give them the clarity of mind to be able to say, okay, this is where I want my life to go. So I have a number of medical doctors that I work with, and I have a really nice sort of there's a referral process actually when people go into hospitals, because many of the specialists are not trained in substance use either. And I find myself now being times a week into hospitals where people like pain specialists are saying, I need you. Okay, this person, I'm dealing with their pain, but they're actually using heroin 10 times a day. I don't know what to do. You need to take over here. And I think, doctors that do that have great humility, and I really appreciate them. And we work together as a team, and I think that that's really where health coaches need to be reaching out to other people in the wellness health space and saying, how do we collaborate? How do we offer skills to one another? How do we offer solutions? And also, Tracy, sometimes we sit with clients and they're very complex. There's a lot of stuff going on. I can give you some examples if you'd like. And
Yes,
I
please.
am like, how on earth? Okay, I'll give you one in a minute. How on earth do I deal with this problem? And so why am I raising this? I'm raising this because it's important to have what I call a community of practice, a group of people that you can confer with and that you feel, has a similar value set, a similar way of dealing with things, that you can say, oh my goodness, I've got this person and I'm not really sure how to deal with it. So I'm going to give you the example that's coming
Yes.
into my head.
Yeah.
I was one of the clients that was referred to me. I'll just call him Jacob for now. Came to me through a specialist. She was a pain specialist, anesthetist. And she said, I really need, look, I've been dealing with this client for X number of years. He's presenting with serious sort of pain that is just affecting his entire body, but we can't find what the cause of it is. We do not know. Every test that we do has come back negative. And yet he has this generalized pain, which is real. He's not making it up, right? So I then got called in to try and work with Jacob. And we've been working around saying, okay, we figure out how we make your life better and try to at least alleviate some of the pain, right? So we started working together, and I started speaking to another doctor, and we did another set of blood tests. I do use biomarkers in my health coaching. And what emerged was that this guy had extremely severe anemia, like extremely severe, which had been overlooked, right? And the medical doctors call it pernicious anemia. And it was so pernicious that he was actually, that was part of the reason that he was so pallid and that he was unable to do anything. He had no energy at all, right? So immediately what we did is through the medical doctors that I work with, we got him back into hospital and we got him to have a blood transfusion so that the anemia at least was sorted out, so that he had some ability to move forward. Anyway, he then started seeing me. He lives about, I would say, an hour and a bit from where I live. So the phone, because he wasn't able to drive. But on the third one, I said to him, Jacob, you will drive to me because you need to break the cycle of just being at home all the time. He's in his early 40s and a single father to a 14-year-old son. He came to my house. We had a session and his son came with. And it was good to meet his son, although his son has already got into self-harming at 14. So there were flags there. But it was good to have the son. So I now have the son is also one of my clients and the father. The next session that they came to, they were 3 hours late. And I was like a little bit irritated, but anyway. And then Jacob went to the bathroom and the son stayed behind. And the son said to me, Monique, do you know why we were so late? I was like, I have no idea. And he said, because we stopped on the way at my dad's drug dealer and we got a combination of pethidine, morphine, and Lyrica.
Wow.
And my father injects himself with that about 5 times a day. But here comes the more difficult part. He asks his son to inject him.
Oh, wow.
Now I'm sitting with a range of issues, right? I'm sitting with the fact that what the guy is doing, what Jacob is doing, he's self-medicating, right? He's got a lot of pain. Doctor's not giving him any answers. He's gone to the illicit drug market. Not unusual, right?
Yeah.
But I also have an underage kid, a kid under the age of 16, who's been exposed to a lot of stuff that he shouldn't be exposed to, who
Yeah.
has told me this in confidence, right? And so I don't know, do I raise this with the father or do I not raise this with the father? Now, this is a very complicated situation. It's not your average health coaching situation, right?
Yeah.
But it is my average health coaching situation. And if I wasn't able to say to my colleagues, like in the medical profession, how do we deal with this?
Mhm.
It would leave me feeling very perplexed. I do need to be able to talk to people. And strangely, just before I spoke to you, Jacob was on the phone to me. He hasn't spoken to me about his substance use, but his son has. And I had to say to him, I am from now on, in our next session, which is tomorrow, I'm going to go head on in dealing with what I think is actually the issue, which is not being spoken about.
Mhm.
And I think he knows what it is. And he has agreed to come tomorrow. And it's not going to be an easy session. It's not going to
Mhm.
be an easy session because it's something that he obviously hides as a sense of shame.
Yeah.
And yet, for me, it is not shame. It is again the system that has failed him. He has sought help for the pain that he is feeling, but he has not got it. And so he has developed his own solution for that, right? Which is to go into the illicit market. And for me, the distinction between the illicit and the licit market is very blurred anyway. So I'm not going in there saying you're doing anything wrong. I'm going in there saying whatever it is you're doing is not helping and we need to make sense of it, right? So that's an example of a kind of complex case, which initially I was like, where do I begin with this? Do I begin with a kid? Do I begin with the substance use? Do I begin with the, inability to express? Where do we begin this? And I've come to the point where I need to deal with it head on. And I will bring a medical doctor in because I will initiate onto an opiate substitute because that is the best care that I can offer him in conjunction with the medical profession. I am not able to prescribe. I do not have that right. But I do know from having worked in this field for a very long time that there are medications that can play a very important role so that he doesn't go into withdrawal. What people don't understand about active drug users or people who use drugs is that they fear two things. The one is overdose, and the other is withdrawal. Once you understand that, it changes the picture completely. These are not people who don't care about their lives or about other people. They are deeply afraid of what the withdrawal will be because it's horrible. They fear. If I take too much, am I going to die? Am I going to leave a 14-year-old on his own? What is going to happen, right? And these are real fears. And when you understand that, the person becomes a human being, just like you and I.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. And so on that note, what can people do to support someone with substance misuse issues in that you said the biggest thing for them is that shame and, the fear of overdose and the fear of withdrawal. So how can we support them?
Mm. As friends and family members, you mean?
Yeah. Yes.
So I think there is in the harm reduction world it's a day that we all sort of celebrate, but it's actually something that we do every day of our lives, and it's called Support Don't Punish. And it's a day where people that are active in the substance use world from the harm reduction movement will say, do not punish people for drug use, rather support them through it. Because the minute you start punishing, the substance use issue gets worse, right? So, my first thing is support, don't punish, right? Attached to that is a very strong sort of belief that, you know, it is important to explain or to help a person understand that we are journeying with them, much like a coach, that we are not going to kick them out, because I think one of the things that unfortunately we are taught all of us about substance use is that substance use is bad, and the way to deal with it is this thing called tough love. My answer to that is tough love kills. Tough love kills. And I'm going to give you an example of this, Tracy. I had somebody who came into my practice and she was living with a lot of guilt. And I was like, where does this guilt come from? And she said, my son was a user, and all my family and my friends told me I must just leave him. And if I don't engage with him, if I don't feed him, if I don't do this, he will come to his senses. What happened? This young person overdosed without wanting to overdose. There was nobody around, and he died. Now the mother lives with this endless guilt that if she had been around, she may have gone into the room, she may have been able to get the drug overdose reversed, and this child of hers may have lived, but that didn't happen. And so what I'm trying to say here is tough love is not the way to go. It is to support, to make that person feel that they are human, perhaps to create some boundaries, because people who live with substance users do have to live with a lot of difficulty. When you're looking for your next fix, there's not a lot that's going to stop you from getting it, right? So it is important also to be able to speak about what you're going through. And so not to feel ashamed of this person, but to know that there are people who are also going through this as well, to connect with other people that are trying to support a family member or a friend going through a substance use issue. So those would be my key lessons, and to look for the right help. Right. Yeah. And that is not putting somebody into a rehab that is about cold turkey. It's about saying, I want you to get care so that you don't suffer more. How do I find that care? Not always easy, because these spaces are not always available, but that is honestly what people should be looking for. Otherwise, the substance use disorder only gets worse, and people begin to feel worse about themselves. I'm talking about family members. I can't help my child. And we all know the stories of people that go on television and do YouTubes about what it felt like to lose a child to a drug overdose. It is not a pretty story. And we can prevent it by saying connection is the opposite of addiction, not sobriety.
I love that connection. Yeah. So in that scenario for Jacob, what would you say would be a good health coaching outcome in his situation?
For me, what would be a good health coaching outcome would be for him to feel that he is able to talk about his pathway into substance use without feeling judged. Yeah. Being able to release the trauma that underlies the substance use, which could be a number of things, including chronic pain. To be able to feel that he's a dignified human being who doesn't have to be operating on the black market undercover and spending a lot of money. So in other words, to be able to have funds that are available to be doing other stuff with his life, and also to seek the right medical help. So with him, I will put him onto an opiate substitute, because it is important that he doesn't go into withdrawal. That would be a terrible outcome. And then to say, Jacob, what is it that you want from your life? It could be anything. It could be going out and having a fun time with his kid. It could be getting back into an exercise regime. It could be dating. It could be eating without getting reflux. It could be anything. And that is not for me to determine. It's for him to determine, right? But I think any and all of those would probably be part of what would come out of it.
Yeah. And so in your years of experience, would you say you've seen a difference in how different ethnic groups navigate the process of recovery? Are there some groups that just seem to really struggle, or have you seen any differences? Yeah.
I don't know if I would say ethnic groups, because, South Africa is such a multicultural space that we also merged. I don't know what any of us are anymore. And, it's this irritating thing. People always like, what are you? Like, where do you really come from? Because I do have like a appearance, and that's because I have Middle Eastern roots, but, and people don't really understand that. So, and many of us, you can't really tell who is what and what is who. And I think it's great. I don't want people to be asking me those questions. But I work in an area now, maybe I should say this. I work in an area in Durban, which is predominantly Muslim. And it's an amazing space to be, because I really enjoy hearing the call to prayer at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Or in the morning. It's a beautiful thing, especially today is a Friday. It is the day of, mosque day, and I appreciate that. But what I find very difficult is the inability of people to talk about drug use, and because it is seen as such a shameful thing. And because I work in this space, I really am trying to surface. I'm going to be holding a talk in the next couple of weeks, which is called "Let's Talk About Drugs and Stop the Harm." Because as long as we don't talk about it, it becomes something that is just lived within our own private space. And so that just gives you an idea of a particular group. And I don't think that it's very different in many other communities. I mean, it's a very interesting thing, Tracy. I work in this space. I come from an Orthodox Jewish background. I'm very welcome in the community in which I work now. And I want to say this because it's very important to me, because of what's going on in the Middle East. It is not an issue at all. It's a very important statements that I want to make, right? Um, but I can tell you that if I went into perhaps a synagogue and spoke about my child, not be that much of a different response there either. It may be like, we don't talk about this in public. Maybe you go and speak to the rabbi, or whatever, put your child into rehab, right? So I think we need to get away. We are all, again, I'm going to say this again, we are all humans navigating the world. And I think that the more we break down the divides, the better it is for all of us. So there are differences, but they're not, once you get to the humanity of every person, it becomes irrelevant. When they walk into your space, they are not a person from an ethnic group. They are a person that comes in with their own stuff. Now, having said that, it is true, and particularly in a place like South Africa, that the most traumatized people will be people of color in South Africa, because they are still living the legacies of apartheid. Those have not disappeared. And it is no surprise, therefore, that the majority of people with a substance use disorder are young Black African men, because the intergenerational pain has continued and has not stopped. But more than that, we have an unemployment rate which is out of control in South Africa, in some places up to 75%, which means what is happening for young people in South Africa? They are looking into a future that is very bleak. And I say to people often, for sure, we have the burden of the past. The burden of the past is colonialism, it's apartheid. But the burden of the future is staring into a black hole where there is no hope. In that context, it is rife for substance use, rife, because what you're trying to do is numb the sensations of hopelessness. And so, in that case, yes, you will find that there will be groups of people that will be more prone towards substance use. But again, it's understanding the biopsychosocial. What is the social context in which these things happen? People do not live in no space. They live in a social world. And what is that social world offering? So I hope that offers your question. I went last night, I actually chaired a book launch. The book was called Apartheid Remains. And one of the things that came out, which I thought was very significant from the author, was saying, in South Africa, we have been forced, even by organizations like the Human Science Research Council, to do research where race is used as a category for basically understanding everything. And I think for those of us who see ourselves in some ways progressive, we're trying to move away from that. We're trying to say, let's talk about people. without identifying their race or ethnicity. Let's try and just see ourselves as a human race and not as a divided race. And it's a very hard thing to do because there are inequities and there are historical disparities and there are reasons for wanting affirmative action. They are very real things, right? But the more we engage in language that's about humanity, the more we're able to make people realize that we are not that different from one another. We are all struggling with our own social and personal and psychological realities.
Yeah. And so for you, we use this question in our health coaching sessions. If anything was possible in the space of substance misuse, what would you love to happen?
What I would love to happen
Mm.
is to have harm reduction programs in every space that they needed, and for government to actually put their money where they say they're going to. So we have in South Africa what's called a drug master plan, which puts a lot of emphasis on harm reduction, but not a cent has gone into harm reduction in South Africa. Every harm reduction program and organization is in the non-profit sector. And for me, if I was to dream forward, I would say, government, get your act together. You have a growing number of substance users in our country, particularly within the ages of 16 to 30. And we are facing a new epidemic. And the only way to get out of that epidemic, which is not about contagious illnesses like HIV and TB, it's about the non-contagious, epidemics like obesity, like drug use, like diabetes. If we do not stop that seriously, we are going to be in a very, very bad situation. So for me, have methadone programs in areas that are affected by drug use. Have people like myself, have social workers trying to make sense of where the trauma was and trying to surface it in a space of non-judgment instead of putting people in prison for being found with drugs. These would be the kinds of things that are important to me, and have a police service that understands why arresting people is really not going to help the people they arrest or them as the police,
Mhm.
because all that's going to happen is within a couple of weeks they're going to find the same person in the same space, but actually, more traumatically, they may find that person dead in the same space. And I can tell you, for police officers who have to pick up bodies of young people who have died of overdose, that is very traumatic. That is not a good thing for our police to have to confront either. So it's about saying, we know where the evidence is going. Why are we not following it? Why are we not taking guidance from the World Health Organization, which is very strongly proposing harm reduction? And the reason for it is very clear. It's because we are bound by these religious moralities, which don't take us anywhere. They are about, like, if you are a good, whatever it is, Christian will not use drugs. That is not true. Take your morality and eat it, because it's not helping anybody, no matter where it comes from, right? And I say this not with disrespect to people, because often they're trying to be helpful, but blame is not taking anybody anywhere. So I think it's
Mm.
about saying, how do we move beyond blame? How do we move towards compassion? How do we provide services that are evidence based and are non punitive?
Yeah. And I think what you said, throughout is, the issue of shame and just seeing the person as a human being and that
Mm,
connection, which honestly I feel is the true elements of what the different denominations and faiths are, but we somehow
yeah.
come to this place of punishment and judgment, and it doesn't
Yeah.
help. So yeah, I love that. So for anyone who is struggling with substance misuse, what would be your advice for them in looking for help or just taking those
Well,
steps to consider the option of seeking help?
what I would do is I would first see, if wherever you are, and many countries don't have this, I would first see, are there any harm reduction centers around and are you able to access services there? That would be the first thing. And the
Okay.
other one would be to say, can I find a health coach, a psychologist, a social worker that is actually going to be able to hear my story without making me feel bad? And that's a hard one. It may sound easy, but it's not easy. I went last weekend, I sat in and it was a meeting of the Association of Social Workers in Private Practice. And I don't know if this thing came up, but, and I asked people, like, training as a social worker around substance use, and it was all about abstinence. That is the goal, abstinence. So it's not an easy thing to find people that have been trained to understand drug use differently. But I think there are networks. So if you know of somebody, let's say somebody contacts me and they're from the UK, I would be able to say, okay, you know what? In the UK, if I were you, I would contact this person. Otherwise, of course, people like myself and other people, everything is very global now. We can work online, we can work in various different ways. Um, and from a beginning online, you can say, look, I really want to refer you to a medical doctor that I know will give you the best possible services, because we do have to work as teams. We cannot do this on our own. Health coaches in the substance use world, if you do not have a team around you, it makes it very, very difficult and very lonely. So that would be my advice. Find a health coach who is working within a network of other practitioners that are in the wellness stroke health space, but who come from an approach that is really true to health coaching, which is that we all have the right to determine what we want from our own lives, what we put into our bodies, and we deal with the consequences of that, right? And when the consequences are not good, we often look for help too late. So try and get help early, and try and be very clear about what it is you want to come out with, right? But be realistic about it. It's very unrealistic to say, I've been using heroin for 20 years and I want to stop in a month. You've got to say, that's not going to happen. It's unlikely to happen. But if it does, if you do try that and you don't manage, failure is part of the learning. We're going to try again. We don't give up on people. So I think, when people know that you're not giving up on them, then it's so much better, when they like, oh my God, I was going to do this and I was committed, but I just didn't. And as health coaches, we have that all the time. People say, I'm definitely going to stick to a blood sugar balancing way of eating because my diabetes is out of control. And they do it really well for a month. And then they come and they're like, oh my God, you know what? I ate like 5 packets of chips and 2 chocolates this weekend. And the idea is to say, not that was bad, but to say, okay, let's try and understand where that happened. And let's try and start again. And I'm happy that you came back. I'm not
Yeah.
disappointed in you. I'm just happy you're back.
Yes.
It's the same with substance
Yeah.
use. It's the same with anything that we're dealing with. So I think that would be my advice. But first, look up if there's a harm reduction center in your area. And if there isn't, get hold of somebody who would align themselves with that. And if you don't know that, then get hold of somebody like me or somebody out there who is a harm reduction advocate and say, please help me find somebody in the space that I live in. So that would be my advice. I would not go the abstinence route. And I would definitely say to people, you are far better off dealing with substance use on an outpatient basis than an inpatient basis. That would be another thing that I would probably say.
Yeah. So what other areas of health coaching are you involved in?
So there are a couple. Obviously, I deal with chronic illness across the board. So mostly neurological, to be honest, but there's diabetes that has crept in, as is expected. Big problem in Durban, and it's all diet related, to be honest. And then the other thing, so again, because I'm dealing with both the social work and the health coaching. I am dealing quite a lot with ADHD, but and I'm enjoying that. So quite a number of kids that are coming with their parents with ADHD, and they come in not knowing whether it's a coaching thing or a social work thing. And actually, it's both, because really what you're doing with kids is trying to get them to express what it is that they want to be doing, and 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 they finding it difficult to express how the medication that they're taking is making them feel. And so it's saying, like, if you as a young person wanted to find your way through this, what would it be, right? And just giving them the voice to say, this is where I want to be with my ADHD, has been it's really interesting. So in my office, I have like the desk here where I work, and then I have a couch and a chair, which looks very Freudian, not by choice, but just by chance. And then I have a play therapy section, which has a big toy box and bean bags and stuff where kids can come and will be talking to me without realizing that they're talking to me. And with them, I'm doing much the same thing. I'm just saying, what are your goals? Where do you want to be? What's happening in your life? What are the obstacles to getting there? And the same self-esteem things that affect adults, are definitely impacting on young kids with ADHD. In fact, self-esteem is probably the biggest thing that impacts kids with ADHD because of the dysregulation of emotions. And so that's something which is coming my way, which I wasn't expecting, but I am really loving it. And so I'm actually, in many cases, I'm dealing with whole families, where I've got the mom dealing with one thing and her kid who's ADHD dealing with another thing, and the husband who's a substance user. And it's a mix of things. And maybe I can just end by saying this, Tracy. I do not ever take it for granted that people trust me with their most personal uh, parts of themselves, and that is their bodies and their emotions, And I think that as health coaches, we do need to recognize that we are privileged to be able to be part of people's journeys. Um, and um, and so I guess that's a big thing for me, and having gone from being in a professorial position at a university, which comes with a whole lot of its own status and whatever, and a lot of pressure as well. And now being able to do this full time, I've realized this is where I want to be. It's a much better place for me. And I'm really happy that I took this leap. And it just feels like, watching people's lives transform in the way they want them to, not in the way somebody else has told them to. That's where the magic lies in health coaching.
Yeah. And I think any client would be so privileged to work with you too, because you're seeing them for who they are as a human. You're taking away these big issues that prevent us from getting to where we are, the shame, the judgment, and just what do you want? As you said before, it's probably the first time someone has ever been asked, what do you want? And you can start anywhere, whether it's your digestion, whether
Totally.
it's having fun
Totally.
with yeah. So I'm so pleased to have you here. And is there any projects that you have or any programs or how can people connect with you?
Well, I mean, they can connect with me. It's not difficult. I can send you all my details. They can
Yeah.
connect with me. I am, what am I doing? There are a lot of projects that I'm doing. The one is that I'm creating a multidisciplinary network here in Durban for people to be able to cross-refer and work together and discuss complex cases, which I think
Mm.
is a really nice thing to do. I do run a harm reduction center, which for people that are homeless. So that's a big part of what I do. Um, and I'm very glad that that's part of my life. That's a big project, actually.